can start the show now. Okay, well, everyone who is joining us and watching us right now, welcome to another episode of Therapy Thursday. My name is Yesenia Barrios, and I am an intern at Urban Health Media Project. Urban Health Media Project is an organization that trains young journalists to report on different health issues, including mental health. And this month, we're going to be talking about foster care and mental health, also the traumas that come with foster care. So we have some amazing guests who are joining us today to talk about this very important problem because it is kind of a problem, and that's why we decided to talk about it, because there's a lot of flaws in the system that need to be addressed. And for those who are directly involved in the foster care system, it can be very detrimental to their mental health. And so we just wanted to bring more awareness to this issue and hopefully educate some people on it. Okay, so I'm gonna get started introducing our amazing guest. To my right, I hope that's the same direction for everyone watching us.
That's me.
Is Dr. Marcina Murray. She is the Director of Health for the Medical Home for Children in Foster Care at Metro Health Medical Center. She's also an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. Then we have Lisa Cohen, who's right under me. She was a former foster child who was placed in a home with her 4 brothers, and then she had a series of different foster home placements. At 20, she joined the U.S. Navy, and then at 28, she started her professional boxing career, and then won a very cool award. I can't recall the name of the award right at the top of my head, but she can tell us the name shortly. And then in 2005, she funded and directed the nonprofit Capital City Champs, an organization for at-risk children that integrated boxing and fitness and coaching for success. And then lastly, to the bottom right, we have Yvette Martinez, who is a California native and a member of the LGBTQ+ community. She worked in public service and child welfare for 8 years, where her interest in foster care advocacy began. In 2018, she adopted her now 7-year-old son. So thank you again for joining us today and for doing this event that will raise awareness. Okay, great. So we're going to get started with the first question, and I'll go ahead and say it to you now. Why is the lack of a stable home detrimental to children's mental health? And we can begin with you, Dr. Murray.
Sure. So the lack of a stable home is really harmful to children's health, because when we think about all the things that children learn in the context of home and family, not having that stable home, they're not able to learn about a lot of things. So when we think about how they approach relationships, how they approach people, how they view structure, and how they process their emotions, so many things that we learn in our home that children who don't have stable homes may not have the opportunity to learn a lot of things. And that's like one of the biggest reasons.
Great, thank you for your input. Yeah, I can definitely, I myself can say that I had the most stable home. So I can imagine for people that, had to change a home very often, how detrimental that must have been. Lisa, what is your opinion on that?
Well, being a product of 13 different moves through foster care from 18 months to 19 years old, I can tell you that it takes you through a different level of post-traumatic stress disorder. It makes it very difficult for you to learn to create healthy relationships with people and trust. There are many trust issues that go along with that. So Yeah, just like the doctor said, it's all connected in that way.
Yeah, of course. What about you, Yvette? What have you personally seen or experienced?
Yeah, I would say I would just to add just a bit to what was already said. I would say the key word that comes up for me is safety. One of the things that I think was very obvious when first received placement with my now adopted son is the need to feel safe, secure, and to be able to anticipate what was going to happen next. And I think that unknown of where will I be tomorrow, and of course, it's going to impact obviously age groups differently. My son was 11 months old, but I think just the safety of knowing that I can anticipate tomorrow to see the same people, to receive food, generally at the same time, and know what at least the very next day or week or months have in store for me as a young child.
Absolutely, yeah.
I agree. You know what? That just made me think of like not just safety, but also like love and acceptance, right? When kids get bounced around a lot of times, they're like, no, they feel unwanted and it really impacts how they feel about themselves. And so when we think about that impact of feeling like if I don't do the right thing, people are gonna leave me, right? No one's
Yeah.
gonna stick around. No one's gonna stay. Those abandonment issues, all those things are also really, I think, key with moving around a lot.
Yeah. And just I guess the general concept of stability, right? They don't really have that, unfortunately. Thank you so much for your input. I'm going to go on to the next question. Why do some children get multiple foster care homes throughout their time in the system? And why is it that they're always like, they can't seem to be one home that they stay in? And we can begin with you, Lisa.
Oh, wow, that's a good one. So as a foster child, it was often I got that question all the time. Oh, why do you keep moving? It's assumed that, oh, you must be real bad. That's why you keep moving. It's something wrong with you. All of these preconceptions of who you are, even as a 5-year old, or even as a 3-year old. It's You're looked at as the bad part of the scenario. When in fact, a lot of the times we don't even know why we were moved. It usually has to do with how the foster parent feels at that time, because you're usually the last person to know. I remember there being times where I didn't know that I was moving until the weekend. That next weekend I wasn't even told, and then it came to the point. It's like that fear that we were just talking about starts to set in, and it's like you don't know where you're going, the uncertainty of anything, and it just creates um, the start of your panics that are to come. So you know that anxiety follows you through your entire life. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I don't like it might be you I don't know if you still remember, but what were some of the thoughts that were going through your head when you were told that you had to go somewhere else?
Oh, yes, I remember everything. I wrote it all down in this lovely book called Being Too Fierce, Woman's Incredible Journey from Foster Child to World Championship Boxer. And the thoughts that went through my head at the time when I was younger, when I was really when I was a little girl, I just thought, well, from the first foster home, I was like, I didn't know what was going on. And then I got there and I knew that we weren't going back. It was devastating. It was like a death, literally, like someone died that you just, learn to love. And that first move, I was 5 years old. And then the second one, I was 9. And I was though it was not a great foster home, But I was still afraid. I would rather stay there because at least I knew what was going on. And, but I was terrified. And, you know, along with that comes the night terrors, um, any and everything. You know, you just think the worst of yourself. You start developing low self-esteem as a child. You're very, very depressed. I was very depressed as a child. I was one of those kids who never said two words and would barely look you in your eye, just because of the stress and the fear and all of that that came into play when I was, you know, that little. Now, when I got older, honestly, I, from about 12 or 13 years old, I had been in my sixth placement. And at that point, it was like, you know, something that we're never supposed to lose. And that is the attachment to people. And so at that point, I learned that I'm moving again. I got to start all over. So I had to get a new school, a new church, new people that I called cousins, new people that I learned are the parts of my foster family. Who am I going to be able to trust that person? How will this person traumatize me? And how much of me am I going to have to change to adjust to this placement? And so that's what you learn to do. You learn to pay close attention. Who is this person? I've seen this before, and gauge it and say, okay, now I know how to manipulate my way through this. And that's what it really turns into. And especially when you're, you know, you become a teenager.
Right. I'm so sorry that you
Okay.
had to go through that. I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been. And it from just your experience that you just told us, it sounds like these children develop a lot of mental health problems, Dr. Murray. And you, of course, deal with children that are in the foster care system. So why do you, just to kind of follow up the initial question, which was why do some children get multiple foster homes throughout the time in their system? I'm sure there's a lot of politics involved in that. But in your professional experience, um, this change, does it affect their mental health in a long term, in the long term? And you know, you can further explain that if
Sure.
that's okay.
Yeah. So the for the first question that you asked, like why change placements so much, you know, any children and family services or whatever it's called in your area, the goal is for children to only have one and them to have one placement while they're in custody, and that's it. That's always the goal. But kids can move for a lot of different reasons. And you know, I remember how you said you didn't know why. It really, really can vary a lot. And unfortunately, a lot of times when kids change placements, it is viewed like the child did something bad, and that's why the foster parent, you know, didn't want them to be there anymore. There are sometimes other reasons, like there are a lot of times other reasons other than that. It could just be something that's going on with the foster parents. They could be having their own, or they could be retiring, or they could want less kids, or different things like that. Sometimes kids move because they're in a sibling group and maybe one sibling is having behavior, other siblings might be fine. But they might move all the children just because they want to keep those sibling groups together. And so it's a lot of different reasons. One of the, in theory, best reasons kids move placements, sometimes they might initially be placed in a foster home, but then they might find a family member for them to live with. And so sometimes that's like a good transition for a lot of kids when they go from a foster home to being with family. So it's a lot of different reasons, and those are just some of the ones that I've come across professionally, but it's a variety, because it's up to the foster parent, like we said earlier, if they say that's what happens. When we're thinking about the long-term mental health issues, we have to think about trauma, right? And so trauma doesn't just mean, physical abuse or neglect. It can be like grief, right? That loss. Traumatic grief, traumatic loss is another type of trauma. And so for some of these kids, whenever they're moving from place to place, that is a trauma in and of itself. For a lot of kids, report coming into the system just coming to foster care alone as a trauma for them, like one of the biggest traumas some of these children report experiencing. So if we think about the long-term impact of trauma on mental health, we know it has a huge impact. It impacts children all the way through adulthood, right? So we know research has shown us that trauma doesn't just impact us emotionally, behaviorally, how we're feeling. It literally impacts our bodies. So people who experience trauma in childhood are more likely to have like heart disease and health problems, a multitude of things, drug addiction leading up to early death. And what we're looking at is it's the trauma. Because if you think about kids who are experiencing trauma, they're like hyped up, on edge, like waiting for the other shoe to drop. When am I going to have to leave? Always elevated. Their bodies are always elevated. And so your body's meant to be elevated for a time, but it's not meant to be elevated for months, for years even. And that's why we see that connection between trauma and physical health problems. And the impact on mental health, anxiety, depression, having suicidal thoughts, just a variety of attention issues, a variety of different things. It can present itself in so many different ways as far as the mental health piece as well.
Right, it's such a complex issue, just so many layers that come with it. Thanks for that. Yvette, according to your personal experience, and I know you said that you fostered your now son when he was 11 months old. Do you see him have any I don't know if mental health issues is the right word, but any lingering effects that he's dealing with or deals with, or just you yourself as a foster parent that have dealt with?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that in addition to fostering my adoptive son, I also had other placements, and so I wanted to provide a little bit of perspective in terms of why those placements never reached the point of adoption. Just to add to what's been added is, there's so many different circumstances and so many different reasons why a child could be moved. And one of the things that I think also adds to the trauma is the very emergency like situation that these kids are in, right? And so the moment that they're detained, the social worker is in a situation to find the most immediate plan of action, and that's placement within sometimes 3 to 4 hours. Sometimes they're saying after hours to try to find a placement for a child. And so they're literally on the phone calling up folks trying to say, I have this child, he or she is 7, or he or she is 5 or 15. And there's very limited information given, like I said, the emergency nature of it. So oftentimes what my experience has been is that foster parents will accept placement, sometimes on these conditional terms, like I will accept the child for X amount of weeks. I can commit to 6 months, or I can commit to only less than 3 months. Or their emergency placement homes where the child is already expected to only be in placement there for maybe a few days, while a more permanent plan is sought out. And so that could lead to those rapid movements early on. The other thing that I think is really prevalent, and this was more so speaking from my work experience, professionally, what I would see is a lot of foster parents take on the placement. So initially get involved in foster care out of a mostly good intention, I believe. And there are obviously some other cases where individuals, which Lisa sort of spoke to momentarily, are entering, this commitment on, not enough information, or perhaps just wrong intention. And so these individuals go through the expected background check and pass that, and I think that any amount of training, you know, if we're just speaking to our own children that maybe we bring up in a family, I mean, none of us are equipped even for that. And so we have these individuals saying, yes, I want to do this. And yes, I want to go through the proper channels and training to become a resource parent or a foster parent. And it's a different, you know, situation sitting in a class being given this information regarding their trauma in an instructional setting, as opposed to that knock comes, you know, at the door, and you have a child who has just arrived to your home having experienced some really severe trauma that you and your family may or may not be, you know, truly equipped for, which then later, you know, they're getting back to the social worker and saying, our placement isn't working. We are not equipped to work with this particular child. And then, of course, you know, family members either step into the narrative at some point in time. That was my experience with 2 previous foster placements. They were moved, relocated to with family, and then one reunified. So in my experience, I get back to your question, is absolutely there are some present day and some things that we've already worked through. But when my son first arrived, his condition was very poor in a lot of different ways. He was living mostly in a car, and some nights in a hotel, other nights in an abandoned like building that where the biological parents were squatting. So he was living in poor conditions. He was malnourished and had just like we've been talking about, a very heightened sense of fear, where the door closing or anybody's voice being elevated really, you know, agitated him and activated in him a response. In fact, the first 6 months that he was in our home, from what I can recall, it honestly seems kind of like a blur, probably lack of sleep and the high stress for everyone involved. It felt like it was about 6 months of almost near constant crying. And to add one more piece, just Lisa, about just connecting with your story about what did I do or why was I moved? Part of my son's narrative is because he cried so much, he was removed from 2 previous homes before coming to placement with me. So, you know, it could be as simple as this infant is inconsolable and we don't know what to do. And so we're no longer interested or willing to have him in our home. And so, and that was real. I mean, that was because that was my experience when I met him as well. I think the difference for our family was that it wasn't temporal or selective in our hearts and minds. It was commitment, and it was love, and it was unconditional.
Thank you. Oh my goodness, that was so heartbreaking. And he was so young, you know, I can't even imagine like what an older kid who is able to kind of process the situations, what goes through their mind. But you're amazing for sticking with him, and just amazing. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that.
Can I say something to what she just said really quickly?
Absolutely, yes, of course.
Just on that topic again, that's huge what you just said, because a lot of times, even young people, I know when I was in foster care, and I'm 53 now, so that was a long time ago, but I know my foster parents did not have training, and we were forbidden to grieve. How dare you grieve? It was like, don't you even open your mouth. How dare you grieve? So that is supposed to numb you to a certain degree, which it does. You know, like I remember moving from my first foster family, who I thought were my parents. I mean, like at that point, I loved those people, and they were taken away. We were taken away from them. But thank you for what you've done, because you allowed that kid to grieve, and that's healing. Everyone should be able to grieve through things, but when you're trained, you don't have a right to grieve. Think about who that creates as an adult. It's not cool, but thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think that should definitely be a requirement, right? Like training those who are interested in becoming foster parents. They should definitely be trained because oftentimes they themselves have a lot of mental problems that they're dealing with. And
Ooh,
so,
that part. I was
yeah.
going to say they need some. I think that a lot of times, you know, the kids are being psychologically evaluated because I know I was many, many times, and all of the tests and things. But I'm telling you, they should have been psychologically evaluating the foster parents at that time. And like I said, it was a different a whole different thing
Yeah, yeah.
that they were
Yeah.
getting.
That ties onto my next question, actually. And I will directly ask you, Dr. Murray, and then I'll move on to other guests to see what they believe, think. Do children in foster care automatically receive therapy? Is it required for some homes? You know, not sure we can get some of your professional experience on that.
That is a great question. So I can only speak to where I live, but it's different. Different states have different criteria. Um, so in general, unfortunately, there's a shortage of mental health providers in a lot of places. So it will vary depending on where the child is. Um, but kids in foster care are not required to participate in therapy. Is my experience, and I think that is actually a, a a good thing in a way. And what I'll say about that is that when kids come into foster care, they're always told, "You the problem, you the problem, you the problem." I mean, whether we literally say that or just move them from home to home, right? And so when we think about really approaching what they're going through a trauma-informed lens, we want to be sensitive to the things they've experienced in their trauma. One important part of trauma-informed care is giving people power and choice, right? And so even though they're kids, I don't believe in forcing them to participate in therapy if they don't want to. You know, we encourage them to try. We make sure that it's available to them. But and sometimes when I'm meeting with kids, especially like teens in custody have told their story so many times they don't want to tell it again, or maybe they've had multiple therapists, and some places have a high turnover rate for therapists, and they had a therapist that they loved and that person left, and they had another therapist that they loved and that person left. And we think about that in context of them moving from home to home. It's really just not appropriate care. So we definitely, we don't force them. Therapy is something that it's going to be as effective as the person participating in it. As much as you put into it, you're going to get out of it. So if a person really doesn't want to, I don't believe in making them do that. Also, I think that when kids come into custody and they are kind of like pushed and forced into it, I feel like they get like resentful for therapy. Like, I don't like therapists. They made me talk to that lady. You know, they get like that. And I'd rather them not do that. Look, hi, I'm a psychologist. I'm cool. You know, I'm just planting the seed. You don't have to take it, but I hope that whenever you get older, at whatever point that you really do need therapy, that we haven't turned you off from it, that you'll approach it, that you'll give it a shot when you're ready.
Yeah, I think
So,
that's, I have a lot of cousins who are teenagers. So I think that when you force them, I personally have seen that they just kind of actually don't want it. You know,
it's
if you
bad.
want to force me, then I don't want it. But that's just
Yeah,
what I have seen.
I've seen the
What
same
it,
thing.
yeah. What do you think, Yvette? Do you or when you were
Yeah,
working in the field that
right.
you were working for the welfare of children?
Yeah, I think that my experience was the same. The teenagers were a lot harder to. I think one of the reasons why I felt like the teens were a lot more reluctant and resistant to pretty much any type of help, essentially, was because there had been so many adults who had come into their life, and a lot of them, with a lanyard and a badge, and they were telling them something, and it usually wasn't good news. It often meant it was a social worker. And so I remember some of the older kids would view like the therapist and say, I'm not sure I can trust them. What if what I say, you know, essentially perpetuates my situation? And so they were reluctant to share, reluctant to open up. My son's experience different because, you know, he's 7, and so he's been in and out of therapy, different types of therapy, since he was about 2. And it hasn't always been smooth. And he, in his own form of, you know, age-appropriate reluctance, he has also, you know, been disengaged or not interested. I think what I do is try to create an environment where he feels like it's something that he can look forward to, which is absolutely a challenge. And we've had some really great therapists that we've been fortunate to work with, and some others that I think probably lacked a lot of experience in working with this population of kids who are really unique and have a unique set of needs. So I would say that I would encourage it, but I absolutely agree with Dr. Murray in that it should never be forced.
Yeah, of course. I actually agree with you too. Lisa, in your personal experience, how available was therapy to you, or how did you deal with that, or your social workers dealt with that?
Okay, so like I said, this was a while ago, so things may have changed, but I was forced to go to therapy. I was one of those I was super depressed. So I was very, very introverted, quiet, would not speak, you know, and all of that. But it still did not keep me out of trouble. Like I didn't go like get myself into trouble, but like I had these facial expressions and I would talk under my breath, you know, I would do stuff like that. So, but I would say I'm so thankful that I went to therapy, and I'm gonna tell you why. I went to 13 different placements. Okay, this is still 19 years old. Think about it. That's 13 different schools, 13 different churches, 13. Well, I stopped at about 4, about 4 best friends and all of that stuff. I had no real connections. I had lost all of my brothers. I had 4 brothers. By the time I got to the 5th foster home, I was by myself. So everybody had gone. When I would lay down in a bed after that for a period of time, I would wake up and literally things would not feel real. It would not feel like, it would be like, is this even, you know, I was questioning reality. But the connection was two people, my therapist and my judge. They kept, because they were there, even though when I went to my therapist, just like the doctor said, I didn't talk. I played, and I sat there and, you know, let her ask me questions, and I would be like, well, what do you think? And how was your day? You know, I was like that. But that consistency of going to that therapist, I am so appreciative to Dr. Livingood to this day, because, and then I had one other one, Dr. Kroll. I'm so thankful for them because they kept me connected to this world, to this, you know, reality, because it really feels like, you know, you move different places every 2 or 3 years. Nothing's real, nothing's stable, nothing's. So I would look at them and say, well, they're there. Well, at least I'll see Dr. Livingood, you know. So I think it was really important.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I wish that, I don't know, people who manage these homes and, again, training foster parents would, train and talk about creative ways to kind of convince children to see a therapist. That would be great because, it is very effective. And just on your personal testimony, Lisa, and, Yvette, your situation as well. And of course, Dr. Murray, I mean, you are a therapist yourself. So we're past the time. If you need to log off, feel free to do so. But if you want to stay in the conversation, I'm just going to ask maybe 2 or 3 more questions, and then we can end the great conversation that we're having. So I'm going to go directly to you, Dr. Murray. In your personal professional experience, what kind of traumatic experiences do children face in group homes, foster homes? How do these experiences affect children, young adults, in long term? I think we kind of talked about this, but what I'm kind of hoping that you would expand on a little bit is, do these children see their foster parents like, I don't know, fight? You know, like I said, they themselves are dealing with mental health problems, that they're probably, you know, maybe abusing these kids mentally, and, you know, obviously in worst case scenarios physically. So that's kind of what I'm going for in this question.
I can't really speak to what kids are going to experience in their foster homes. I will say, to comment on what Lisa talked about earlier, is that foster homes now, foster parents do receive a nice amount of training about child development, about trauma, about a lot of different things that it sounds like, unfortunately, they didn't get that when you were a foster in foster care. So, but now, hours and hours. I mean, Yvette can speak to it. They get hours and hours of training. I've completed the training before. So it depends on what type of foster home you are, but you get like 30 to 60 hours of training, and you have to continue get training every year. And so, you know, hopefully a lot of these foster parents are aware of what's good and what's not good, you know, for kids, and especially kids who've experienced trauma already. So I think it's really, you know, important to focus on the foster parents that are doing things right. So I can't really speak to that part, the negative part.
Thank you. Either way, we appreciate any input you can offer. Yvette, do you have any opinions to that question? Personal assessment?
Yeah, I think that my perspective is sort of a combination of reading through reports on what some of the kiddos were reporting happening in homes. And obviously, I don't think this is the setting, you know, to dive into those topics. But what I can recall is, you know, sometimes that they were having a wonderful experience and things were going well, and there were other times where they reported, you know, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and those things, you know, of course, are investigated, which also can tie back to that first question we're talking about. If there is some sort of investigation that would prompt, you know, a child to be relocated. But one of the things, and this is sort of more on terms of like a speculation, is that I imagine it's very confusing. You know, oftentimes you're placed in a home where the family, either culturally or traditionally speaking, are, you know, so different from you. And so I would imagine that a lot of the foster kiddos experience this other almost form of trauma of having to learn and adjust to a very different home life. I can recall just kind of briefly just adding to this story is kiddos that were coming maybe from a certain home that had religious practices, and then were placed in new homes where there were very different religious practices in the home and expectations around that, or one that also, you know, it's been years, but kiddos like wanting a preference on how they dressed or you know, did their hair. And of course, I know that the foster care system, you know, is working to help alleviate these sort of situations from happening. But kids going into a home where like these foster parents were saying, no, in this house, like we cut our hair this way, and you're not allowed to have long hair, or you know, you're not going to be able to wear that sweatshirt or whatever it might be. So it is also, you know, adding to what I think Lisa mentioned, is having to change your identity and adjust so that you can fit, because you know, I imagine so desperately want to, that you're willing, and then sometimes unwilling, which leads to that contention between the foster parents and foster child.
That's a very good point. Lisa, to your personal experience, what were some of the most traumatic experiences that you can remember? I know, like Yvette said, we don't have to dive too deep into that because, you know.
We can. It's an open book. very candidly, sexual abuse. Let me just say this. I've been in quite a few foster homes with foster fathers, and I am so fortunate and so grateful and thankful to say that it wasn't them. It was not the foster fathers. The foster fathers did not present any amount of abuse to me, and I'm so thankful for that. What I received was a lot of physical beatings, and it was almost like the norm. But there was one particular foster mother who just had it for me. I was a very little girl, and I was in love with my former foster parents. I did not know my my on a personal level, my biological mother, but I loved my former foster parents. And like I said, I was just taken away from them, and I cried every single night. I'm in this new bed. I had night terrors. I remember getting cut. My bed was right beside a window, and you remember those thick blinds that were very heavy. I remember I woke up and I was like cut up a little bit on my arms because I had been fighting the blinds in my sleep, because I missed them so much, and I got a whipping for that because I messed up her blinds. I was like 5 years old. It was not. Please don't be sad because like this. I'm not saying this because I just want you to know that the mental, I would have taken the beatings physical because you can get past that for real. Like as long as you're not getting bones broken and stuff. But the mental abuse is the worst. The mental abuse is the worst because that follows you that's the kind of stuff that makes you want to unalive yourself. So yeah, I've touched all levels of abuse, but like I said, how the way that I processed it and the way that my foster siblings processed it was a little different. I processed it by probably thinking about it and trying to understand it. But at 5 years old, I remember sitting on the steps right in front of the kitchen when one of my foster parents was talking a whole bunch of crap about how I was in crap, how I looked. You're so skinny, you're so black, your own mom doesn't want, all of these things. And it clicked right there. I was like, in my head, I remember this. Wait a minute, you're darker than me. You wear that wig on your head every day. You calling me all of these things. And it dawned on me, I said, she's talking about herself. And so even at that age, I had started to see, oh, okay, that's not, they're not talking about me. So I started carrying that attitude a little bit more, which could kind of play as a little bit of an attitude when you're a foster child and you got an attitude and you have a little bit of esteem. Like if you show any kind of self-esteem, sometimes it turns into, oh, it's something wrong with you. You're getting out of my house. How dare you how dare you think you're better than, So that mental abuse, in my opinion, is the worst, though.
Yeah, thanks for that very powerful statement. I'm gonna jump onto the next question and then we can conclude our wonderful conversation. What advice would you give to a person who is considering becoming a foster parent? And I know Jane put a question on the chat that can relate to this. And if they cannot, for some reason, become a foster parent, how can they help children who are in the foster care system? And we can begin with you, Dr. Murray.
Thank you. So first, if a person is thinking about being a foster parent, I would say do it. It's really a shortage. And I remember being in college, and I don't remember where I was, but it really struck me. I was at a talk in college. It was a room full of, young, ready to go college students. And the person at the podium said, every single person in this room should have one foster child. Everybody. If everybody would just be available to be a foster parent, we would not have, the abuse that people have experienced that, Lisa reported, like, we wouldn't have those issues. And so I just would really encourage more people to be foster parents. It is an investment in time, but it really can make a huge difference. I mean, let's say you're a person, you're married, you got 2 kids, throw one more in there. Get a foster parent. You got 1 kid, throw one more in there. Double up. Like, if every family would just do that, oh gosh, it would change the whole entire system in such a positive way and impact so many kids. So if everybody did, I'm not going to say it's a little bit, but it's a lot. It's a commitment. But if everybody would do it, it would just make such a difference. So if you're thinking about do it. If you're thinking about doing it. Talk to your partner, whoever you live with. It does have to be like home based, like got to do it together, but do it. Do it. Take that step. If you can't do it for whatever reasons, I would say mentor. These kids need somebody. The mentoring programs, they looking for good, positive people to be there for these kids. And you could do a formal mentoring program. You could support the youth group at your church, which might have a foster care kid, whatever. Just give back. I would say community service, volunteer, like mentor someone and get that relationship, because it's in the context of those relationships, like Lisa talked about, forming those relationships with kids that you can really, really have the biggest impact.
Absolutely. Thank you. Just kind of to a little deeper into that, what kind of specific advice would you give them for those who are going to take that step to mentally prepare for it? Be resilient, I don't know, just kind of something relating to their mental health as well, because I know it can be hard for parents to, start that journey.
I would say just kind of keep your eyes on what's your purpose, right? So if a person is looking to be a foster parent, looking to that, to give back in that way and to help, think about your purpose, because it's going to be a journey and it's going to be times where it's difficult, but you have to think about your bigger purpose. And like, everyone has to have their own kind of view of how they look at things. So like personally, with working with kids in foster care, I see a lot of negative things. Like, I see a lot of abuse and harm. People do messed up stuff to kids. It's like, how do you reconcile that? One of the ways I reconcile that is really giving back, like doing what I can do in my life, professional and personal, to make the world a better place and give back. And, I might see this bad, but I'm doing what I can to help. Like, that's my kind of view on it, but you have to kind of figure out what yours is.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of always explore the idea, and I'm still kind of young and not stable and anything, but I would love to. It would be something that I always thought about for like so many years. So maybe sometime in the future. Lisa, what advice would you give to someone who's considering becoming a foster parent?
Can I pitch my book real quick?
Yeah, of course, definitely. Okay. Everyone read it.
I would say, read my book. I would say that because I tell a very, very candid story about, okay, this is the first part. To anybody who wants to be a foster parent, do it because you want to do it. Don't do it with the expectation that you can create a person in your image that's going to do any and everything that you want them to do. That's not going to happen. Don't create an expectation. The other part, and I would have been saying this, don't do it for the money, because first of all, it's not a lot of money. That's A. But still, there are people who fill their homes up so they can get those multiple streams of money, and they do it for the money. Do not do it for the money. And also, be very, very careful how you treat kids, because kids grow up to be adults who write books. And I remembered everything. And one of my, when I was a little kid, I had a revenge list. And I wrote about that revenge list all the way up till I was about, I don't know, the age keeps changing. I remember it going to about 15 or something like that. And I met a woman who ended up being my mentor, and I call her my mom to this day. But my best cathartic thing that I could have ever done, besides boxing, was to write this book. And I remembered everything. And as I remembered things, I remembered more. So I would just say, just like my own daughter here, she, my daughter would be like, "Oh, Mom, you remember that time you said this to me?" We remember everything, and we will throw it back out there. So I would just say, be careful how you treat people, because they will remember it. And you may be in a book somewhere. Just be a good person. Do it because you want. I know I had a few really good experiences, about 2, but my brother Jeff, he had the best experience about his 5th home. He got with a foster mother and a father, and I think there was a sibling, and he stayed there till he was an adult. And this woman, till this day, she is the best. She is a really good person. And I actually love her because of the way that she treated my brother. So, just do it because you love children. Don't come in with preconceptions. Don't make preconceptions of who they are and who they need to be and so forth. So,
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for that great advice. And we'll, of course, include your book in the story that we're going to write. And thank you. Yvette, what would your advice? You've been a foster parent multiple times and eventually adopted one. So kind of shows your true intentions that you wanted this for the long term. And so what would be your advice?
I would say that 2 things, 2 really, really quick responses to that is to grow your own self-awareness about who you are and what are the things that are really important to you. What are your values? Because they'll be tested and tried throughout the process. It's really important to get really clear, I think, on not having a lot of expectation. And I agree with you, Lisa. A lot of folks come into it with this abundance of expectation on what this experience is going to be like. And I think it can be, told in such a fairy tale way that people are, disappointed and upset when things don't turn out, the way that maybe they thought they would going into this process. I would say to start learning as much as you can in the process of waiting. It's a waiting period until you receive placement, and of course all the classes and hours that are to be completed. So connecting with someone who is already a foster parent and getting their firsthand experience. And I think, just right now, listening to you, Lisa, has been incredible, because for me, just being able to hear someone who, from your point of view, who's able to verbalize and talk about and recount these experiences. So I thank you for that. I do think that it's a really important piece to gather from people who have lived in this experience, either and or, as a foster child and or a foster parent. And the last thing, which was the key thing for me throughout this experience, is you need to have a sense of community and support. So build a village to support you. So just like Dr. Murray said, get with your partner. It really is a community thing. There's no way that my son and I would have made it to this point without a lot of people's help, truly, beyond, our therapists and whatnot, family members and friends who just stepped up in really big ways when the weight got heavy and when I felt weary and I was like, what am I doing? I'll never have enough gifts or skills or love to make this better, and so leaning into other people who believe also, and maybe those people are the folks that you're referring to, Dr. Murray, is like, you can't, maybe for some whatever reason, you're not set up to be a foster parent, but who do you know that currently is one or is thinking about becoming a foster parent? And how could you step up for that person and just say, hey, I got your back. I know, like, I'm going to just be there for you. I think that that's going to be, an essential piece of how you can be an integral piece of someone else's foster journey and that experience and impact a child.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know many foster parents, but I would totally, I will actually look into the mentoring. That sounds very interesting, an option to explore. Okay. Thank you so much for those amazing inputs and for sharing your experience. And we had, I think, a wonderful conversation. And there are so many questions I didn't get to because there just isn't enough time. And we're already like 25 minutes over time. But thank you again for doing this, for raising awareness to this problem. And please keep an eye out for a story that I'll be writing. We're going to publish it on our website and hopefully other publications. And we're also going to do a summary video. So keep an eye out for that. We're going to be publishing it on our social media as well. Again, thank you so much for your time and for all the work that you're doing that's making a big change. Thank you so much and have a great night. And thank you so much to everyone who joined us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.